When President Trump last addressed the BRT when he was on the campaign trail, his big push was on tax cuts. He's going there today as he's proposing tax hikes in the form of tariffs.
Not true.
And I'm curious
He's not doing
why
that.
he's prioritizing that over the tax cuts.
He's actually not implementing tax hikes. Tariffs are a tax hike on foreign countries that, again, have been ripping us off. Tariffs are a tax cut for the American people, and the president is a staunch advocate of tax cuts.
Sorry, have you ever paid a tariff? Because I have.
That's
They
it.
don't get charged on foreign companies, they get charged on the importers.
And ultimately, when we have fair and balanced trade, which the American people have not seen in decades, as I said at the beginning, revenues will stay here, wages will go up, and our country will be made wealthy again. And I think it's insulting that you are trying to test my knowledge of economics and the decisions that this president has made. I'm now regret giving a question to the Associated Press.
What's the tariff on bananas?
The tariff on bananas would be representative of the countries that produce them.
And what's that tariff?
Generally 10%.
Correct, 10%. Walmart has already increased the cost of bananas by 8%.
There's no uncertainty if you build in America and you produce your product in America, there will be no tariff.
We can't
So the
produce
concept
bananas in
of
America.
building in America and paying no tariff is very, very clear.
We cannot
Fighting for
build
imports is
bananas in
not the
America.
The tariffs, the cost of tariffs on automobiles, which will begin, I don't know, August 1st or whatever, will be paid by people like me, the consumer. The question is, does the president realize the consumer pays the tariffs?
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with that. Is who pays the tariffs is a choice. And what we've seen thus far is that the manufacturers are eating a substantial portion of the tariffs and taking it into their profit margins. So you might see, for instance, Toyota hasn't raised prices, and they may choose to go for market share rather than raising prices.
Bottom line, do you acknowledge that these tariffs amount to a tax on the American people?
Well, first of all, let's back up, because what we've seen, for instance, the Japanese automakers have said they're eating the tariffs. So
but these companies say they're eating the tariffs. These American companies.
They're eating the tariffs. So, and again, there are numerous companies who are doing the opposite. You're taking these from earnings calls, and on earnings calls, they have to give the draconian scenario.
Bottom line, Mr. Secretary, do you acknowledge that these tariffs are a tax on American consumers?
No, I don't.
Even though you have companies saying they are going to have to increase prices, and given the fact that 86% of these tariffs so far have been paid by Americans.
You're quoting Goldman Sachs. So
yes, Goldman Sachs, correct.
I made
I
made a good career trading against Goldman Sachs.
For months now, we've been hearing from Trump's loyalists that tariffs are not a tax on us consumers, and the benevolent, always moral corporations of the world would be more than happy to miss out on some profit if it means rebalancing global trade, in the words of the Trump administration.
Most countries will pay higher. The small countries are likely to be 10%, but the bigger countries are likely to pay higher. That's just the way it's going to be, because we can't have these $1 trillion trade deficit. It's just wrong for America, and Donald Trump is going to fix it.
And American corporations are just going to swallow that and not pass that price increase on to consumers? What's your projection?
What's so interesting is that you're worried about the importers. How about the people who build and employ Americans
No, I'm asking
here?
about people who go to the
People
store
who
to
make
buy.
cars here, people who manufacture here. They don't pay a tariff. They don't pay a tariff at all. So President Trump says it all the time. Build in America, you don't pay a tariff. The idea that these importers are more important than the people who employ Americans, I think it's just a wrong way of thinking about it. Americans deserve to be employed here and have the best jobs in the world, and that's what Donald Trump is trying to deliver.
I was asking you about consumer prices, what people will pay when they go to the store. But since you don't want to answer...
I think they'll be low. I think they'll be low, shockingly low.
Okay. The consumer price index doesn't currently reflect that, though. The trend is towards higher.
Who writes the check to the Treasury?
Well, the check is written to the person who receives it at the dock in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. The check is written by the person
who receives
it at the dock. So the tariff is paid in this country by the importer. Is that right?
But the Brazilian exporter could decide that they want to keep market share. They could lower their price so that the full 50% of the tariff, say, and
they could eat part of the cost. They could eat part of the tariff,
which is what we've seen.
Okay. But the check is written by the importer, right, at the dock.
Yeah, and then the importer can pass it on or not.
Even when presented with the facts, they still refuse to acknowledge reality and admit that they're working on behalf of the small club of ultra-rich capital owners, leaving the rest of us to, pick up the difference. And here's the reality. According to a report from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, using U.S. Census Bureau and foreign trade data through November 2025, Americans paid for nearly 90% of the tariffs last year. Not foreign governments, not overseas exporters, American households and American businesses. The report found from January to August, Americans paid 94% of the levies. From September to October, 92%. Even by November, it was still 86%. Economists were clear. The bulk of the tariff incidence continues to fall on us, U.S. firms and consumers. Here's what that means in plain English. If foreign companies were actually paying the tariffs, they would have to lower their prices so that the final cost to Americans stayed the same after the tax was applied. That's not what happened. Prices only modestly declined, which means domestic companies either absorbed the cost or they passed it directly on to you. That's how a tax works, folks. And while Trump continues to insist that foreign producers are footing the bill, the data says otherwise. Meantime, consumer confidence has sunk to its lowest level in more than 11 years, with respondents citing tariffs, prices, inflation as major concerns. People are not confused. They're feeling it. At the grocery store, they're feeling it when they just buy appliances, for example. They're also feeling it when small businesses raise prices to survive.
The paper is an embarrassment. It's, I think, the worst paper I've ever seen in the history of the Federal Reserve System. The people associated with this paper should presumably be disciplined because what they've done is they've put out a conclusion which has created a lot of news that's highly partisan based on analysis that wouldn't be accepted in a first semester econ class.
I can't help thinking that some of the feelings of frustration with people with this economy has something to do with affordability, and it makes me wonder whether tariffs are hurting the low-end consumer.
I honestly, Joe, I was just going to say that I honestly think that what we're seeing in the data, the latest surveys that we're seeing, the Michigan survey and so on, is
it's not regressive. You'll stake your life on it as a.
No, I usually don't like that survey. But what I'm saying is that the normal pattern, right, is that it takes a while for wages to adjust. Wages are sticky. In fact, sticky wages are a key part of every Keynesian macroeconomic model. And what that means is that people don't get their salary adjustment till January or February, or sometimes don't really understand the full after-tax implications until they file their taxes in April or hopefully early this year.
And then you have Kevin Hassett and others just waving around reports as if theory can override reality. It can't. The problem is that economic models do not pay your rent. They do not buy your groceries. They do not offset a lackluster jobs report. They do not restore confidence in an economy where people feel like they're working harder for less. Hassett can talk about long-term gains, strategic trade, rebalancing all he wants, but what he completely ignores is the public's very real concern about affordability. Prices are high, wages are not keeping pace, consumer confidence is sliding, and yet the message from the administration is, trust us. This is all part of the plan. People have heard that before, though. The truth is, you cannot tell working families that tariffs are not a tax when the Federal Reserve's own data shows they are paying the overwhelming majority of it. You cannot claim to be pro-worker while defending a policy that transfers costs downward. And you cannot build long-term confidence by denying short-term pain. This is not about theory. It is about who bears the burden. And according to the data, it's us.